Welcome all. I think we'll get started. We have some people who are attending online as well, and we want to respect the fact they're probably been prompt. So let me welcome you on behalf of the Islesboro Forum Committee to the fourth program of the season. And I'm Gail Jackson. I'll be the moderator of today's program. I'll just remind you that this is our 29th year of presenting distinguished speakers to the island community, and this is a milestone moment, our first program of the summer in person at the community center since August of 2019. So we could applaud the fact that we're back together, except that we know we're in a tenuous state. And my next statement was going to be that this and our next three programs will all be in person, barring unforeseen developments with COVID-19. However, we have just decided that next week's program will only be via Zoom because we were bringing in some people who have traveled from all around the country, and we don't want to take any unnecessary risks. So next week on Zoom, and then just stay tuned and we'll see what we can do for the final two programs. We hope to welcome as many of you in person in future programs as we can, except for next week. And the entire calendar of programs is available for you to scan at the website, islesboroforum.org. Before I introduce our speaker, let me encourage you, both you in the audience here in person and those online, to share your comments and speaker ideas for future seasons via our website. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the 7 other members of our committee for their support and ideas, and our technical producer, Michael Hutcherson. Their names are all listed on the website. Now, I'm going to take a moment to ask you to please consider making a donation to the forum. I've made that request every week since we began, and so far the donations are just dribbling in. So I hope you would give that a little more thought. We have a beautiful basket right here that would gratefully receive any contributions you could make. We've estimated that our costs for all 7 programs are about $1,500, and so we hope you'll want to help support it so we can keep going. A quick reminder as to our format: once our speaker has completed his remarks, we will have time for Q&A. For those here in person, just raise your hand. For those participating remotely, you should find the Q&A function on the bottom right of the Zoom webinar screen. Type in your question, hit the enter button, and I will restate your question for our speaker to answer. Now, it is my pleasure to ask Islesboro Forum Committee member Bruce Claflin to introduce tonight's speaker, a very special island resident, Roger Heinen, who has done much to help the island community, particularly in the IT area. Roger recently took on a new responsibility as co-chair with Tom Tudor of the Islesboro Economic Sustainability Corporation, known as the IESC for short. And now I'd like to turn it over to Bruce Claflin for the introduction.
Thanks very much, Gail. Good evening, everybody. Introducing Roger to Islesboro is like introducing the Pope to Catholics, because everybody knows who he is. But what you may not know is that prior to the 25 years ago when he and Marnie moved here, Roger had a long and distinguished career in the computer industry. He worked for Apple and Microsoft, among others. While there, a number of senior positions, but one of the ones that I thought was most interesting was he helped early stage startups get their financing, begin to develop, build their strategy and plans. Skill and experience he's still using today here on Islesboro. In terms of educational background, Roger has a degree from Worcester Polytech Institute, also the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Now, many of us know Roger as Mr. Broadband because, of course, he brought fiber to the island. But as was pointed out by Gail, he's also the co-founder of the Islesboro Economic Sustainability Corporation, or IESC. And this is an organization which takes private donations and uses them to help stimulate or protect island businesses and services that are essential for the island. So here to talk about IESC is my friend Roger Heinen.
Thank you, Bruce and Gail, for that nice introduction. And welcome to everyone here in person and also to everyone in the Zoom world. It's actually pretty nice to have a live audience. I wasn't sure about doing this with just the Zoom. Tonight is all about the IESC. I'm going to spend some time introducing what we did, what problem we are trying to solve, how we went about that problem, and then describe a little bit of detail about the IESC, what we've done over the first year or so, and then transition the discussion into showing you the results of our recent economic sustainability survey. We call it the Essential Businesses and Services Survey. And then we'll open it up for your thoughts and questions. This is one of several events we're doing this summer and fall to communicate with the community about what we're doing, but also to get feedback about what we should be doing. And we will continue to do these sorts of events as we go forward. Where I'd like to start tonight is the same place we started with an information meeting some 2019. And Tom Tudor and I were working on this problem. We were spending a lot of time with Arch Gillies as the chair of the select board on how to do this and what the issues were. And this slide comes from that original presentation. And I made the hypothesis that the island is at risk, the community is at risk, and as typical, we're sort of on our own to fix it. There's nobody going to come from the state to fix any issues that we have here. There's no one certainly coming from the federal government. And pick any question you want to start with, and here's just 7. Any question you want to start with, and you will find yourself revolving around this circle. And each one of these are individually somewhat cosmic in proportion to get solved. My journey started with this one, the ferry rates. And if you recall, 2018, 2019, the ferry rates went way up. And my conclusion, I had 2 conclusions. One, the ferry rates aren't going to go down. They're going to go up forever. And 2, the island had to be more self-sufficient and less reliant on the ferry. Up to that point, those of us who were living on the island relied on the ferry almost as if it was a toll bridge. We didn't think twice about taking the ferry to the mainland to go to grocery shop. With the raised prices, you have to give some thought to whether you want to go onto the ferry. So I came at this immediately thinking, what can we do to be much more self-sufficient? Tom came at it from a different direction, and he was much more interested in the question of sustainability and what I would call vitality of the community overall. And that was how our journey began. When we talk about self-sufficiency and sustainability, we need to gather a number of pieces together. It's clearly full-time residents, families, and jobs. And as you'll see, that's a theme that will transcend this presentation. We clearly have to think hard about what we can do as a community to ease the cost of island living and the logistics of actually living and working here. We need to think about how to reduce the need to take the ferry. Pretty much, we're like a small country where everything is imported from the mainland and we basically export trash. We need to think about that much more seriously as we go forward. We need to remain attractive to the summer community because after all, the summer community is the financial horsepower that drives the island economics. And we need to focus on this question Tom posed about viability and vitality over just thinking about this as a need to grow. We probably will grow as a full-time community, but we need to not put that first. Rather, we need to worry the vitality and viability. Come on, cooperate. There we go. The historic perspective that we came up with when we were thinking about this is there was this thing called the Islesboro Board of Trade. Its role was to promote the welfare and various industries on the island. They spent a lot of time off the island and working to promote Islesboro businesses to off-island businessmen and politicians. They had a basketball team that they sent out on the road, and they worked hard. Then in the 2030 guiding statement about the town that was adopted a few years ago, they talked about the town's Economic Development Committee, and will have launched an Economic Development Corporation. Very interesting. The committee at that time was chaired by Arch Gillies. There were a number of us trying to help it, but as they say, when all is said and done, there's more said than done. So the big idea from Tom and myself was to find a way to invest in the essential services and businesses in the island. And that meant we had to think about financing, we had to think about infrastructure, where were the businesses going to be housed, and we had to think about delivering information about how to be a successful business on the island and what aid can you draw from off the island. We decided after a number of steps to form an economic development corporation. We thought about doing this as a standard 501c3 charitable organization, but one of the attorneys we were working with said, no, that's not the way to do it. Towns and cities all over Maine have these things called economic development corporations. That's what you should do. And sure enough, we thought, oh wow, this is the entity that we need to use. And as you'll see, these are structured by state statute to work hand in hand with the town or community. One thing we did differently from a typical economic development corp, and we weren't able to find anyone else in the state doing it this way, is we said all our funds will come from community donations, and we will not ask for tax dollars to get our job done. And we'll talk about that some more. And ultimately, what we should be thinking of as the goal for this corporation is to improve the vitality, the viability, the full-time island families and jobs. Can we do that now? No way do we have enough time in the history of this corporation to see that kind of result. But maybe in 5 years we'll take a chance and be able to see it. The mission statement from our bylaws is to be a catalyst. We use this term often. The essential services and businesses. Improve the viability and sustainability of the island. Complement the comprehensive plan. Promote sustainable year-round populations, support local businesses, and protect the island environment. That's in the bylaws, and it's a governing statement. From a standpoint of how do we do this, what is the structure of this, and we'll first talk about governance. It is an economic development corporation. This is called a quasi-municipal not-for-profit. It was approved by the voters in late 2019, and it follows the main statutes for how to structure these. Because it is a quasi-municipal corporation, it operates with the sunshine laws. We have numerous powers to lend, purchase property, loan money, borrow money, recycle the funds that we take in, promote the island, and so forth. One of the reasons to do this corporation, rather than making this a department of the town or a committee of the select board, was that we, as a corporation, can act independently as if we're delegated by the voters to do these things on their behalf. The way to think about this, and it's not not technically true, but the way to think about this is the town is the sole shareholder in this corporation. The select board play an important role at representing the shareholder input to us as the board. The board is an all-volunteer 9-member board. It's appointed by the select board. A key point that we need to make is that although we serve 3-year terms, we serve at the will of the select board. They can replace us and remove us at any time. So if the select board representing the town is dissatisfied with what we're doing, they can completely replace the leadership of the corporation. We, of course, we don't get involved with the nomination of board members. That's all up to the select board, but we do give them a job spec of skills that we'd like to see on the board. We currently have 7 board members named. That's myself, Tom Tudor as vice chair, Bonnie Hughes as treasurer. Gabe Pendleton represents the select board. That's a named seat on the board, a select board member. Janet Anderson, being the town manager, is also in a named seat of the town manager. Glad Jones and Lois Childs. A key component of the structure of the board is a majority must be residents. That was important to the voters. We can't be self-dealing. The members of the board cannot benefit from the work of the committee of the corporation, and we have a duty of care just like any other board of a corporation. Because we're a corporation, we have to have all this infrastructure and scaffolding, and clearly that's things like bylaws, investment strategy, banking accounts, a website, lawyers, insurance. We have a public accountant so that we can have an independent audit every year. The funding is where we're separate from other economic development corporations. We set out to raise $1.5 to $2 million to create a working capital fund that would revolve as we put this money to work. In addition, we said ultimately we want to be able to say that every single person in the community has helped us in some financial way. That's a long-term goal here. The short-term goal is to build this working capital fund. Tax-deductible donations or contributions are made to the town and designated for the IESC. Following the buildup of this working capital fund, we will fundraise as needed for future projects. We have the power to leverage regional, state, federal grants and loans. We have no power to request tax dollars, although the reverse isn't quite true. The select board could allocate tax dollars to us, but we don't ask for tax dollars. In fact, we're property tax neutral. And the other covenant in the funding equation is that we must maintain a positive net equity, so we can't have a negative net equity. In terms of what we've accomplished over the first year, and some things that we were disappointed in, as of today, we've raised just over $1.5 million of that $2 million goal from 59 donors. We haven't yet cracked the nut of getting a regional or state or federal grant, although we've been working on it. Probably the thing we spent most time on the last 12 months was the purchase of the Island Market property over here in the town center. As you know, Shake and Looney wanted to retire. They wanted to sell the business, but the building was owned by Phil and Audrey Berry. Phil and Audrey had a handshake relationship with Shake and Looney on the rent. However, Sky and Marianne Purdy were trying to buy the business, but their bank financing would not lend them the money unless they had a long-term lease, which the Berrys were unwilling to do. We stepped in and offered to buy the property from the Berrys, and thus we were able to now extend a 15-year lease to Sky and Marianne, and thus the deal and the purchase and the transition from Shake and Looney to Sky and Marianne was complete. We stood up early last year, about the time of COVID, kicking off what we call an Island Business Mentor Program. It is where we have a half a dozen or a few more experts on various business management topics, and those people are made available anonymously to the community. So if a business needs help with bookkeeping or some legal advice, they can look to our website. We need to do better marketing on that. We haven't seen as much usage of it as we thought. We have a loan program, and it's focused on business, seeding a business, expanding a business, and for a short time when the COVID recovery was in place, we also advanced money on the COVID recovery loans. This loan program has been somewhat misunderstood. We're not a bank. We are a fund to help seed businesses and expand businesses. And that makes it a little tough for people to understand. And as we'll talk about in a second, we have 3 loans outstanding now. 2 were for helping people buy equipment, and 1 was to seed the Dustin Reedy's mushroom farm business up island. That's a perfect example of what we're interested in doing and helping. To my knowledge, the only time we've turned someone down is that they literally asked for $300,000 or $400,000 to remodel their house. And again, we're not a bank, but had they come to us and said, I need help to set up my business in that house, that would have been a different conversation. So it's all about the essential services and businesses, and not just about giving money out to people in the town. Everything that we need to have to operate the company is in place. Following the Island Market property purchase, we have about $859,000 in the bank. There's about $75,000 outstanding in loans. They're all current. And we have spent on fixed expenses, and this is the thing I worry about most. What are our fixed year-to-year expenses? We've spent about $17,000. Now, in practice, we've spent significantly on some things we had to do to the Island Market building. And so we have spent this year much more than that, but from a standpoint of what is our overhead year to year, it's about $17,000 or $20,000. We've done a lot of work with other organizations in town. The Energy Committee, we helped a little bit with them to get a grant for planning. I'm personally working with a team of people that's trying to convince the Department of Transportation to embrace a different model of ferry travel for the islands. There is a new housing committee that's been formed by the select board. We're going to take part in that. Tom will represent us. We've worked with the ICC, this building, on what the overall vision and future is for this town center. So we've done a lot. Have we done as much as we wanted to? No. Clearly, COVID impacted us. From a standpoint of what we're trying to do, I've just captured a few things. Number one is we need some better data. We oftentimes operate a little bit too much on anecdotal information. And a great example is there seems to be a housing crisis, and it feels real, but we don't really know the numbers behind that crisis. And we will ourselves, and hopefully working with other organizations, get some of this data in the near term. We need to find a way to be successful prospecting for these federal and state and regional grants. There's money out there to help do things the way that we want to do, but we just haven't cracked that yet. We're in the midst of planning and implementing the future of the Island Market property as a keystone part of the town center. We'd love to improve parking and traffic flow. We'd love to modernize the gas pump. It's the only retail gas pump on the island. We have been talking about additional light commercial space, and is that important? We need to get some data on whether or not there's a market for that. And the fellow across the street, Josh Linscott, who has the auto repair business, had asked us about the future of the garage building. Well, it turns out he's willing to move the garage building and move it across the street, and that would open up all sorts of possibilities for the parking, the traffic flow, and the gas pump. So hopefully that will complete. He's in the planning board stage now. We need to, as I mentioned, we need to expand the awareness of our loan and mentor programs. And then finally, we need to look to transform the survey results into some to-do items. Now let's talk about our survey. We do these surveys. This is the second one. This is all about what are the essential businesses and services. I think there's only 5 questions or maybe 6. And the idea here is for us to discern a community consensus on what's important, what would aid vitality, sustainability, self-sufficiency. It informs us in terms of what we should be working on. And ultimately, as you'll see, there's a lot on people's mind. We had 119 responses, and by my experience with online surveys on the island, that's pretty good. It's not great, but it's pretty good. I'll start with, we asked people to rank the importance of essential services and businesses. Right, 100% said plumbers, electricians, and groceries. 100% said that's an essential element of making life on the island possible. About 75% of the respondents said auto repair, restaurants, boatyards, locally grown produce, excavation, gravel and roads, carpenters and handymen. And then we get down to about 50% where people mention painters, small engine repair, house cleaning, caretaking, hardware and building supplies, landscaping and hair care came down slightly under that. And this was a way, these questions were designed to get people in the mode of thinking what would be essential to have out here. We also asked about health-related services, and we took a chance here because we don't ask about town services. We don't ask about the fire department, plowing, things like that, broadband. We don't ask those questions. Those are town services. We did want to understand how important was the health center, the ambulance and EMT, the first responders. Boardman Cottage came in at 75%, in-home care services, telemedicine, which we have the health center is working to perfect now, is very important to people, physical therapy. Prescription delivery turns out to be a tough one and will show up again in the comments. Counseling and masseuse came in just under 50%. A big hot topic for people is to talk about the ease of use of the ferry, the affordability. 75% of the respondents ranked parking in Lincolnville and parking in Islesboro as a problem. We asked about an Uber in Lincolnville or a car rental service in Lincolnville or a taxi jitney service in Islesboro. And then you can see that the Islesboro side, people focused on the taxi jitney service, not on the car rental or the Uber. Housing, we know if you've been on the island for the last 4 or 5 months, I believe some 40 properties have changed hands in the last 12 months on the island. That's astounding. That's an unbelievable number because we have gone for years with a dozen transfers during a year. People are very concerned about affordable full-time family homes. They're very concerned about rentals for full-time families or people as they transition to here and get convinced they can live here. Seasonal rentals, seasonal homes, people, yeah, okay. It's important, but not essential. Then we got to comments, and I apologize for the balloon slide, but I got as much of the comments on here as I could. And we asked 2 questions. One question was, what should the IESC be doing to help the essential services and businesses and help the island? And the other one was more specific or about, give us some ideas for businesses that should be on the island. Overwhelmingly, we got many, many comments that had the word support families in it. And our role is to support businesses, but clearly Other organizations on the island are focused on helping families. And we need to continue to work together with the ICF, IAP, and so forth, supporting families. But those words come in overwhelmingly. As I mentioned, family housing and rentals, repeated mentions of the importance of family housing and rentals. I've summed up dozens of comments about the ferry, some pretty snarky, in terms of finding alternatives, affordability, alternatives like a ferry to Belfast, which we could talk about in the Q&A, and the whole ease of use question. Is there a way to improve how you would use the ferry? Energy comes up in dozens of comments, and I summed up all the energy comments into one that said, basically make every home and business sustainably energy efficient. I don't know what that means, but certainly the Energy Committee could take that as input that is very important for people. A number of people mentioned how hard it is to get any small job done on the island that requires a tradesperson. The island is operating near 100% employment, and it's very hard to find someone that can fix or do a small job for you, especially if and it's an important thing for some of the older citizens. Safer biking came up several times. Many, many times we heard comments about the lack of sophistication when it comes to the island businesses and how they do their business. Our mentor program is intended to directly help this. And one thing that we've concluded is we got to get the word out that we're willing to help you learn how to manage your business better. You just have to ask. Food options, restaurants, cafes, many, many mentions of that. And then a corollary to the trades comment was that people asked us to promote or train new tradespeople. When we get to specifics, there's a couple mentions about the gas pump being 24-hour availability, many mentions about composting and trash management. As I said, we import everything, we export trash. If we could cut down on the amount of trash we need to send out, that would cut down on the town budget. There is a proposal to do composting. I'd love to see that proposal go forward. The key question is who's going to do it? But it's a great idea. We've had a proposal from someone to put a pelletizer on the island that would transform cardboard into heating pellets. Interesting idea. A laundry there's a mention or two about laundry, hair care, handyman services. A good idea that I thought a good idea was this one down here, Island Business Resource website. Currently, people reach out on Facebook if they need some service. Wouldn't it be better if we had a website that every business could sort of advertise for free? One person mentioned Makerspace. Very, very interesting. That would be sort of a shared workspace. Your imagination can run with that. Hardware store comes up. Tree deadfall clearing. If you drive around the island, there's a lot of blowdowns. It's a little bit of a hazard, fire hazard. We should maybe work on that. There is a delivery service on the island. You can arrange to have him, I think it's called Delivery Maine, go and get something for you on the mainland. But people pine for the days of Jack Leach going every day and making multiple stops with picking up prescriptions or groceries or plants from the plant store, or whatever it might be. People yearn to go back to the time when we had a freight service like that. And then one person mentioned swimming pool, John. Thank you. And that is a summary of some of the comments, but you can see what's on people's mind. So let's turn instead now, before I summarize, to questions from the audience or questions from the Zoomosphere, thoughts about what we're doing, ideas for what we should be doing. Who wants to start? There are questions in the Zoomosphere? Okay, go ahead, Toby.
It sounds like you're short on resources to get the jobs done that you're talking about. The question is, can you bring on people who are non-board members and have them take on ad hoc jobs to take care of things like fundraising and like working on grants and so forth, so that you bring talent that focuses on those specific jobs and let you guys do the administration?
We could, and in fact, we've relied heavily on Arch Gillies, for instance, to be our chief fundraiser as a volunteer. I would say that the board is probably not on board to have employees, but in terms of getting tasks done, yeah, we have the power to ask anybody to help us. There's only 7 board members named right now. We probably should press the select board to name a couple more board members. But generally, you're correct that we have the power to let other people help us. It's not a closed system. John.
Roger, how would you deal with introducing and encouraging competition to existing businesses? So it's hard to get plumbing work done, but do you want to try and actively encourage another plumber to come here? And how does JT feel about that? I mean, there's those sort of issues.
So John asks the question about encouraging competition, and I would say we're cautious about this question of competition. We don't want to unintentionally create competition that would cannibalize another business on island. So for instance, in the plumbing perspective, we'd much rather find a way to support ACE and JT to have more employees than we would to set up another plumbing business. But competition might be good in some cases, so we'll just remain cautious about it. But it's a really interesting question, and we have said, for instance, in the restaurant business, would we really take a chance on supporting multiple restaurants on the island that would cannibalize each other, frankly, during the winter? That would be a tough, I don't think we'd do that. Larry.
Are there additional opportunities perhaps for aquaculture to develop further on the island? Got mussels, no oysters, kelp is a possibility. Are there other opportunities that we might be able to exploit?
Yes, and we know that there's oyster farms. Clearly, Josh and Shay have made a growing business with their mussel business. We also heard about kelp the other day. If a person came forward or those businesses asked for help, we would be right there to try to help them continue. I wouldn't classify them as an essential business, but it's a really good business for jobs on the island. And yeah, I think there's plenty of opportunity for other people to do that. Gail.
I heard you say that data and grant writing are 2 areas where you would like to strengthen your resources. Have you thought about using business students or similarly qualified students from a nearby institution to help with the data gathering?
And so the question is, have we thought about using local or regional students or institutions or other resources to help us with this question about prospecting for federal, state, regional aid or gathering data? And the answer is yes. We're not going to gather the data ourselves. We're likely to find someone to help us gather the data because we'd like to do it in a little more scholarly fashion than our expertise. So it's likely that we'll find someone. I had a person suggest using UMaine Orono. They have a group that does these kind of economic development surveys. There's a company in Augusta that does economic development surveys. We'd have to obviously think about how much that would cost. If there was a grassroots data gathering thing, I can't think of any better way than to use the students in town to help us do that. Nina had a question.
Yes, I wanted to ask about the
Yeah, and I think it should be clear from the point that I made about cooperating with other groups. We don't want to overstep on anybody else's toes. If somebody else like IAP is working on affordable housing, IIT works on land trust and land preservation, ICF helps individuals. So our job is to focus on the businesses and the services on the island. Now that said, we've had several meetings with IAP about what they're doing, what we could possibly do. We're not sure, frankly, about what the role is of IESC in housing. We're not going to be in the housing business. They're in the housing business. But is there some way we can help them or an entrepreneur try to fix the housing question? Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Roger.
Yes.
We've got a couple good questions from the Zoom audience, if you don't mind. Bob Slauson asks, are there ways we can use technology to get things from the mainland? If someone is on the mainland and can pick up items, could we sign up and have SMS communications available, or something to provide immediate response from the mainland to the island? Facebook tries, but it is not reliable.
Do I need to repeat that one?
Nope.
Okay. I think that's a great idea. I'd love to see someone say, oh, could we do an online resource to schedule, like you do an Uber driver, to schedule people to help you pick things up on the mainland. And I think that might be a good thing to do. It's a little bit of a tech challenge, but what a great idea. It could be something to make a business out of that would work other places. And it would be better than Facebook, frankly.
Yeah, most anything would be better than Facebook these days. Terrence Henry has a question. A restaurant would have, or more of a statement, a restaurant would have a better time of it if there was ferry service in the evening. Many from the mainland might come to Islesboro for a romantic evening cruise and dinner.
Very interesting. I am going on my third year of paying attention to the ferry alternative proposition. And if you recall, I think it was Earl Mackenzie who championed this idea first of why don't we have a high-speed, energy-efficient passenger ferry going to and from Belfast, runs early in the morning and runs into the evening. That way you could have a job on the mainland, which you can't do now with the ferry schedule. That way you could go out to dinner reliably on the mainland. And we found a group in Belfast associated with Front Street Shipyard called the Arcadia Alliance. They represent a Norwegian firm that builds high-speed passenger ferries for the rest of the world and a lot of the country, but not for Maine. And if you remember, and I think Bruce here in the audience remembers helping us with the business plan and the market analysis, we built a whole business plan for such a proposition running 6:30 a.m. and 8 o'clock, specifically for this point. And what happened was we were going to cannibalize the ferry service terribly. We could be a going concern, but for every person that didn't ride the ferry, the effect would be the ferry rates would go up. Because the ferry is funded as half the cost has to come from the tickets. Half the cost comes from the state. So we backed off. We didn't want to have an unintended consequence. And rather, we convinced the Arcadia people to focus their attention on convincing the Department of Transportation, who runs the ferry service, for them to promote the idea of energy-efficient passenger service to the islands. There's two benefits. One is it's a transformational benefit for the islands in terms of getting to and from. Belfast wanted us big time. They were willing to give parking and so forth and dock space. And the other thing is the ferry service could build very different kind of ferries for the Lincolnville Islesboro run if that ferry was mostly about hauling trucks and cars. They could be very different. They could be run with fewer crew members. The current Maggie can take 200 and something passengers. And a simpler ferry would take fewer passengers, but require fewer crew members and could be built much more effectively, could be more effectively electricized. Islesboro needs to think about the ferry. Several $1 million of money. It costs Islesboro several $1 million a year to go to and from the mainland. That's a tax that our neighbors on the mainland don't pay. It makes everything out here, living, services, goods, much more expensive. It's an important topic. Gail, you had a question and then we'll go back.
This is minor compared to the ferry, but you mentioned the value of having a site where people could find services, and I wonder whether you have next door here on the island.
We do. The question is, do we have Nextdoor on the island, which is an online service, not unlike other social media services? And would that be a benefit, or could that do the job of helping people make connections for these short-term requests? And we do have it. You can do it. Unfortunately, and I signed up to see what it was like, but their definition of neighborhood includes Northport and Searsport and a lot of things that are not Islesboro specific. So
You can define the neighborhood.
I understand, but currently it's all jumbled up and somebody needs to administer it. Question back in the back.
I've been hearing there's a lot of federal aid coming available for broadband investment. Do you think it's possible for Islesboro own investment?
Well, the question is, there's a lot of money, federal money and state money, being sent to help broadband, build out broadband for rural Maine and rural America. And I pay attention to those grant definitions, looking to see if there's some way that either we could recoup some of the investment or find a way to utilize that money to help us improve something, like get some new equipment. And I haven't yet found it. One of the things that the state has always insisted on is this notion of unserved areas. So the money has to go to unserved areas before it goes to anybody else. That kind of limits what happens here, although it turns out that if you look at the state map, we're totally unserved, but everybody knows we're not. I think there's time for maybe one or two more questions. Michael?
I've got a couple from home. Barry and Jane Warren are asking, have you considered investing in the cafe in terms of remodeling to bring kitchen access to the cafe space here in this building?
That's certainly something worth talking about. We haven't been asked. If we were asked, maybe we could think of some way to help.
And our last question is from Laura Stange Giardino up island there. It is, how do we attract more, quote, young people to the island? Trade school teaching, plumbing, electrical, carpentry, etc. Could they apprentice with existing Islesboro companies and eventually be the next generation providing services to the community? And in the meantime, they would be living on the island, invigorating economic activity.
I think that is a terrific summary of what we're trying to do. It's very hard to know what the issues are that either make the island unattractive or attractive. We know there have been people who moved out here because of broadband. They can work from here. Well, what a surprise. So that part's good. However, is the reason that they're not out here living because of a cost issue? Is it housing? Is it preschool? Is it a school? What are the reasons? It's a mystery. And I think that, to me, is the root of this question about we just need better data. We need to figure out, why are there any of those hundreds of people that come over on the ferry every morning who would consider living here? And if so, what would it take to get them to move here? Those are questions we need to find the answer to. And I think it's a good summary of the difficulty Because frankly, you can invest in housing, but how many houses? You can invest in a restaurant. Would that be is that the key to the kingdom, to get people to move here, to have a more vital community? Well, it sort of feels that way. Can we get more data on that? Last question.
A big obstacle for anyone running a small business is healthcare, and we have many small businesses, but none really large enough to operate their own health plans. Have you thought about a way to combine the employee bases of for-profit businesses and the nonprofits to offer health insurance to employees?
Interesting question. And that is there a way to build a healthcare coverage consortium, if you will, so that the small businesses on the island could take advantage of that, and it would be essentially a pooled insurance thing? I think it's a great idea. I don't know the mechanism, I don't know the legality of doing it. It's come up several times before, and I think it's worth looking at. I honestly do. Now, if you have further questions, feel free to contact us, and I'll give the contact information in the end. Can we bring the slides back up? The key takeaways tonight are the theme of this IESC is invest in essential services and businesses. It's funded by community donations, not taxes. And tonight's not a fundraising event, but if you're sitting there in the audience or out in the Zoom land, and you say, wow, that sounds like a great idea, I really believe in what they're doing, I'm optimistic about the future of the island, we would love to talk to you about how you might be able to help us financially. So if that comes to your mind, please get in touch with us, we'll follow up, we'll talk to you. I mentioned that we work hand in hand with both the town's success is our success, and vice versa, and other town organizations, because nobody wants to compete with other organizations in town. Ultimately, the payoff, the outcome we're seeking is vitality, sustainability, self-sufficiency, and families and jobs. And with that, I'll say thank you to everyone who came. Gail.
All right, thank you so much, Roger. It's clear that a person of your experience and wisdom and ability to communicate, dedicating your time and energy and experience to this project are great gifts to the community. And I want to include Tom Tudor in that as well, because I believe he's shouldering a lot of it, and to the rest of the members of your committee who are willing to serve. I found it extremely informative, and I will follow with interest and dig into my pocket also to give you some support from my end. So we thank you very much, and we thank those of you who came in person. It's a joy to see real physical human beings, and I hope we'll be able to do this for at least some of the remaining programs. Now I want to take just a minute to mention next week's program, August the 8th. Our speaker is Miles O'Brien. He is the science correspondent for NPR NewsHour. He also does documentaries and writings for Frontline and other public television corporation programs. He has his own production company as well. You will recognize him immediately when you see him if you can't visualize his face now. He is the voice behind all of the coverage of such things as the Mars rover findings and landings, the spacecraft launchings, just all things science. And he has a remarkable ability to translate those scientific breakthroughs and advances into language that is understandable and entertaining. So I recommend him highly. It's thanks to Bruce Claflin that we will have him as our next speaker. So thank you for coming tonight. Think about a donation for the forum, and we look forward to seeing you next week.